Welcome back to Sampstra Games, the place to find new strategy games, and welcome to my guide on combat in Hard West 2. So, first of all, if you're here, I'm assuming you already played the game and you understand that Bravado is the biggest deal there is. You understand the fact that if you're looking at an enemy and has low HP, you shouldn't just be killing them with whoever's closest. You should be thinking about how can I use this as a resource? Who do I want to give this kill to? In order to then either continue killing with this character or instead get them into a good position. So I'm assuming you know all of that. If any of what I just said makes you go like, oh wait, I'm so confused, write it down in the comments and I might make a beginner guide, but this is for all of you big boys and girls out there. Alright, so let's jump into tip number 1. Enemy priorities. So not every enemy is created equal. There are going to be enemies where you have to kill them the moment you see them. Otherwise, they're going to do huge damage to you. And there are enemies that you can kind of not care about. A great example of this is in Mission 4, where you're going to have a bunch of melee enemies and then black hearts. Black hearts are really, really big deal because they can do big area attacks and have strong range attacks. So you really don't want to let them attack you. But the melee warriors, it's pretty easy to run out of their range because you have pretty good movement, so you can get away from them and they will only move to you, which will then make it easier for you to kill them because they'll typically be bunched together around you and you'll have a good chance, but they will not be able to hit you because they don't have enough action points. So always understand when you're looking at your enemies, is this an enemy that I have to kill ASAP or is this an enemy that I can leave for future rounds? Who has higher priority than ranged attackers? Enemies that can throw grenades, because throwing grenade typically only costs 1 action point, so they can move 2 actions, for example, and then throw a grenade at you. The good example of this is the Exploding Drunk or Blast Brothers, and I believe the Demolishers as well, though they tend to run towards you, so they have low HP, so they're pretty easy to kill. But in general, people who can throw grenades at you, you will want to kill them first, or you have to be really, really far away from them, which can be quite difficult because you won't have enough action points to move, do some damage, and then run away. Tip number 2, shadow swap on Flynn. So we're not going to go through all the abilities, but this specific abilities deserves its own category because it makes the game so different if you know how to use it properly. So as you can see, I've got Flynn over here and she has a shadow swap ability which allows her to swap places with the character in her line of sight. It only costs 1 action point and she can do it once per turn unless you get a higher level of her abilities, in which case she can do it multiple times per turn, and she also can give the enemy bleeding. There are 3 main ways you want to be using shadow swap. So the first one is the one that the tutorial shows you around mission 2, where the idea of using shadow swap is to get Flynn into a good position. This typically means if you have enemies on a higher ground or in a sort of like hard to reach area, you can just shadow swap, get her into position, and then because it only costs 1 action point, you can typically shoot with this dirty copper and try to kill somebody to give her like to revive her action points and give her a bravado. The subcategory of this is to use shadow swap in order to move. So the thing about this game is that oftentimes you'll end up with some people sort of behind because you give somebody the bravado, the reviving of action points, but you don't always are able to do that to everybody. So typically I like to leave Flynn behind a little bit because she can use shadow swap to move through huge distances, even that would cost like 2-3 action points for the price of just 1. So number 2, the second way to use shadow swap is you want to get the enemy close to you. So if we go back to mission number 4 where I talked about the melee enemies and the black hearts, more often than not black hearts are far away from you and not all of your people will have a shot at them. So you want to use Flynn to shadow swap the enemy close to you, and then you can sort of use up all your people to destroy them very quickly in a single turn from the moment you see them typically. So I like to use shadow swap to get those high priority enemies close to me so I can finish them off in the turn I see them. Okay? So tip number 3, and this is a pretty fun one if you like using Klalish or Jin or essentially anybody that is going to be using this rifle that has 3 AP cost, because the problem with the rifles is that you shoot with them and you don't have any more movement. So you essentially have to be in a good position a turn in advance in order to kill your enemies, because you can't move on the actual turn to get in position unless you get Bravado. So, but what you can do, the amazing trick is, with Flynn, you can use Flynn to do her turn so she can shoot with her dirty copper, and then you're gonna swap her with, let's say, Jin, and so that Jin is now going to be swapped into a good position from which he can use his rifle to do a lot of damage, and then he can get his Bravado and he can keep moving. So essentially you can use it to get your other pulsing members into good spots. Tip number 3 is all about dazing your enemy. So sometimes you'll meet an enemy that's just really big. It has like, let's say 24, 30 HP or something really big, and you just can't kill it on the turn you meet it. And if it's a big ranged attack guy, you might not be able to run away either. And so what if you don't want to take damage from this guy? What you gonna do, right? Like, are you just supposed to take it? Of course not. Come on. You're not gonna take it. So if you're wondering why you're not going to take it, I actually make guides for this game about how to do every single area without taking any damage, and also completing all the objectives. There's going to be a link for it in the description if you want to see it for your mission, for any mission that you're struggling with. So I am definitely not going to take it. So how do you deal with that? What do you do? Well, Laughing Deer has an ability, Wild Run, and if you get it to level 2 at least, you will be able to daze your enemies, which means that they cannot use weapons. This is absolutely huge, because first of all, it means that you can essentially make an enemy completely obsolete, and you can just run with Laughing to hit somebody just once, just for 3 damage or 4, and then just leave them for future turns and give your other characters time to focus on other enemies that you have to kill. Or you can just sort of go in on a big guy, but if you just don't have enough damage to kill him in a single turn, you can just make sure that he doesn't hit you back. So this is pretty huge. Another thing is, if you don't have Wild Run 2, as you might see for me over here, you might think, well, how are you dazing your enemies? You can actually buy weapons that give that option. For example, this Gunstock Club has an option of dazing your enemies. So this is very cool, because you could potentially, with Laughing Deer, you could maybe use a Wild Run and then move, and then use this regular ability to hit 2 people in a turn without Bravado, or even more if you can get Bravado, and just daze a bunch of different enemies. This is also going to be important once you encounter duelists, which are enemies that can attack you back when you attack them. So this extra ability in Wild Run will stop the enemy from countering you. Alright, tip number 4 is all about positioning. So what I mean by this is that this game is not really meant for scouting, especially if you're trying to do it the way I do, where you don't take any damage. Because if you try to take a character to scout forward, it will be alone in an area of enemies, and you typically won't be able to get far enough away to hide from taking damage. So if you have to scout, you want to use either Laughing Deer or Flynn. Flynn, because of the Shadow Swap ability, like I said, she can move a lot, and also Laughing Deer with his Wild Run, he can do bigger distances in a single turn because of the Wild Run ability. Also on Laughing Deer, you definitely want to give him everything that increases his speed so that he can get as good movement as possible. But generally with the positioning, I found that especially if you don't have a round limit on your mission, you often want to fall back and let your enemies come to you. This is especially useful if your enemies are melee or have short ranges on their weapons, because they have to come real close, and that typically means that they will be bundled together, and then you can use multi-attacks. A good example for that was in a mission that I'm showing you right now, where essentially I was able to fall back, get a bunch of enemies come to me, and win this mission super easily. Last point related to positioning is that you always want to think about using the Bravado in a way that people who are far back can move forward. Good example of this, if you're going to be using Kalish and you want to be using her in order to use the rifles that cost 3 action points because that's what she's good at, oftentimes she'll be sort of struggling behind. So you want to make sure that you give her that Bravado, those important kills, so that you can at least move her in range so she'll have a shot next, and otherwise she'll end up often fairly useless. as opposed to all the other characters. This is a good segue to tip number 5, and that's multi-attacks. You always want to use multi-attacks as much as possible. How to do multi-attacks? You have bucket shots. This is from one of the weapons that you get on pretty early, which is this this coach gun, which can do damage 4, and also fairly early within mission 4, I believe you can get this suit-off shotgun, which also does a bucket shot. Watch out for this, because you can only do bucket shot once per turn. You cannot do it multiple times, even though it's cheap to use. It has only 1 AP cost, so just keep that in mind. You can also use Jin's Shadow Barrage for multi-attacks. The Shadow Barrage is actually better than the bucket shot because it goes past cover, which means it can attack through walls and etc. As opposed to the bucket shot, which has to just takes into account the regular sort of cover and etc. Another way to do multi-attacks is Dead Man's Revenge on Old Man Bill. Personally, I don't use this because, like I said, I do the guides without taking any damage, so my Old Man Bill always have full HP, so this doesn't make that ability particularly useful. But if you leave him at half HP or 5 HP and you play around with him, then you can use this to do quite a bit of damage. And final use of multi-attacks is obviously dynamites. The thing about multi-attacks, one thing I want to point out here is that you shouldn't just be you should almost never, unless it's a side objective, try to kill more than 1 person at a time with a multi-attack. Now, this obviously, you want to attack a lot of people with a multi-attack, but you don't want to kill more than 1 at a time. Why? Because you will be wasting action points. If you kill 2 people, that means you could have given someone else an extra turn, or even the same guy you're using an extra turn. So always try to make sure with your multi-attacks that you only kill 1 person with them and give somebody else that second kill. So typically the way this looks, if you're doing a multi-attack on 2 people with, let's say, 10 HP, you want to use, for example, Flynn to hit up the first guy, then use Jin's with his Shadow Barrage to finish off the first guy and hurt the second one, and then you'll lose, for example, Laughing Deer to finish off the second one. And now you actually got 2 times Bravado, once for Jin and once for Laughing Deer, as opposed to if you just did this, if you killed them, if you first used Flynn and Laughing Deer and then Jin, you would only get 1 Bravado. So this is related to like tip 0, but I figured I would say it over here. So I think these are all my 5 tips about combat. If you have more tips about combat, or if you want to learn about something specific in this game, write it down in the comments and I might just make a guide about that. Alright, so, oh, and also, if you're just starting to game and you're not sure what difficulty you want to play, I have a 1-minute video talking all about the difficulty, so you can check that out as well. Click on the right to watch my other guides. I'll see you there. Bye bye!